never imagined my husband's funeral would be the moment my entire world shattered. I should have been mourning him, grieving the man I spent 4 decades beside. But instead I stood there, dressed in black, while a stranger with a briefcase turned my life into a living nightmare. The church was full, humming with whispered condolences and long stares. People kept coming up to me, patting my hand, saying how strong I was. I nodded politely, clenching my teeth, waiting for it all to be over. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. The lawyer, slick suit, no soul, walked straight up the church steps like he was the one being honored. I thought he came to pay respects, maybe share something kind about my late husband. But no. He cleared his throat, opened that briefcase, and read aloud the will, right there in front of everyone. And when he said my husband had left everything to another woman, I didn't even flinch. I froze. My hands went numb. For a second, I thought I was dreaming, but the gasps around me confirmed it was all very real. I didn't cry. Not then. I looked around at all the familiar faces. Our children, our grandchildren, neighbors we'd shared dinners with, people who had watched our lives unfold for years. And I saw pity in every eye. I was the wife, the loyal partner, the woman who held him during his last breath. And yet I had just been publicly erased, replaced. I wanted to scream, to demand answers. But the humiliation sat heavy on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I walked out of that church with my head high, not because I was strong, but because I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. My daughter ran after me, begging me to sit down, to let the lawyer explain. Explain what? That I was nothing to the man I buried? That everything we built together, our home, our savings, even our family business, was now legally in the hands of someone else? My hands trembled as I pulled my coat tighter around me and kept walking. Back home, the silence was louder than the funeral hymns. Every room reminded me of him. His favorite chair, his books, the smell of his cologne lingering in the hallway. I sat at the edge of our bed and finally let the tears fall. Not just for him, but for the betrayal. For the decades I gave, the sacrifices I made, and for the cruel twist that turned me into a stranger in my own life. My phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from relatives, messages of confusion, concern, gossip. I ignored them all. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the lawyer's words over and over. All assets to be transferred to Miss Helena Duarte. Who was she? A mistress? A friend? A stranger? The name meant nothing to me, and yet it now meant everything. I got up, opened our safe, and pulled out every document I could find. Financial records, letters, old photos, anything that might give me a clue. But there was nothing, not a trace of her. In the morning, I called the lawyer. I demanded a meeting. He sounded surprised but agreed. When I walked into his office later that afternoon, he greeted me like I was just another client. No sympathy, just business. I sat across from him, gripping the edge of the chair, my voice shaking as I asked the only question that mattered. Who is she? He glanced at his notes, then looked me in the eye and said, I'm not authorized to disclose that. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. I'm his wife. He shrugged. That doesn't change the terms of the will. My fingers curled into fists. I wanted to throw something, scream until the walls shook, but instead I took a deep breath and left. I needed answers, and clearly I wouldn't get them from him. I went home and made myself a cup of tea, forcing myself to calm down. Then I sat at the table, pulled out my laptop, and started digging. I searched the name, Helena Duarte. Dozens of results, most unrelated. A few social media profiles, none familiar. I clicked through them all, looking for a face that might unlock a memory. But nothing. I called my son, Daniel, asked if he had ever heard the name. He hesitated before saying no, too quickly. I could hear the lie in his voice. I pushed, but he hung up. That silence spoke louder than words. Suddenly, I was alone in this. My children didn't want to get involved. My friends didn't know what to say. Everyone treated me like a ghost, as if I had died with him. But I wasn't dead. I was angry. I was hurt. And I was determined to find out who this woman was and why my husband had chosen to give her everything. That night, I pulled out the boxes from the attic. The old ones. Letters, receipts, journals. I was looking for a needle in a haystack, but I didn't care. One box in particular caught my attention. It was marked with a faded label. Private. I don't remember seeing it before. Inside were envelopes, all sealed, addressed to someone I didn't know. And at the bottom, one picture. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6, standing beside a man who looked disturbingly familiar. My heart stopped. My mind raced. I had never seen this child before, but the resemblance to my husband was undeniable. Could she be his daughter? My stomach turned. A child he never told me about? I stared at that photo for hours, piecing together fragments of the past. Late nights, sudden business trips, times he came home quiet, distracted. I never questioned it back then. I trusted him. I believed in our life. And now, all those years felt like a lie. The anger burned hotter than the grief. I had been loyal, faithful, devoted, and yet I had been deceived. The next morning, I drove to the return address written on one of the envelopes. It was a small house on the edge of the city. I knocked. A woman opened the door, younger than me, but not young. She looked startled. I introduced myself. I'm Amelia, Jerome's wife. Her face paled. She stepped aside. Let me in. And just like that, I crossed the threshold into a truth I was never meant to know. She sat me down, offered me tea. I didn't drink it. I asked who she was. Her voice trembled as she said, "My name is Helena. He was my father." The words hit like a punch to the chest. I stared at her, searching her face for more clues. Her eyes, her mouth, they were his. My mind refused to accept it, but my heart already knew. My husband had another daughter, and he never told me. She reached for something and handed me a small box. Inside were more letters, all written by him. Apologies, regrets, promises, letters he never sent. She had found them after his death. I read them one by one, my hands shaking. He loved her. He had tried to do right by her, in secret. But in doing so, he had destroyed me. I left her house in silence, the weight of betrayal heavy in my bones. As I drove home, one question kept haunting me. If he had trusted me, would things have been different? And if I had known, would I have forgiven him? The answers didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what I was going to do now. I wasn't going to fade quietly. I wasn't going to let this define the rest of my life. I had lost everything, but I still had my voice, and I was going to use it. And so I made a decision, one that would lead me down a path I never imagined, one that would force me to confront not only my husband's secrets, but my own strength. Because if my life was going to be rewritten, I was going to be the one holding the pen. The days that followed felt like walking through a storm that refused to pass. Every corner of the house whispered a different secret. Every photograph on the wall stared back at me with a question I couldn't answer. I kept thinking about Helena, her voice, her face, her truth. The truth I had been denied for over 40 years. My husband had a daughter with another woman, and he never told me. Instead, he left her everything, and left me nothing but memories built on lies. I started waking up at strange hours, sometimes gasping for breath, as if I had been drowning in my sleep. I would walk down the hallway, barefoot, dazed and open doors just to make sure the house hadn't disappeared under me. It was all still there. The rooms, the furniture, the smell of his old aftershave lingering in our bedroom. But everything felt hollow, like I was living in a museum dedicated to a man I never really knew. I began talking to myself out loud, asking questions into the empty air. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't I see it? Was I not enough? Did you love her more? I knew there were no answers, not anymore, but the silence around me was suffocating. So I filled it with my voice, my anger, my confusion. I spoke because it reminded me that I was still here, that I hadn't disappeared with him. Helena didn't reach out again. She didn't have to. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about the life she must have had. Half in shadow, half in silence. I wondered if she hated me, if she saw me as the woman who kept her father away. I wondered if she had been waiting for him to show up, year after year, only to be disappointed. And yet, in the end, he gave her everything. Maybe that was his way of saying sorry, I went back to the lawyer. This time I was calm. I asked for copies of all the legal documents, and he handed them over without a word. The signature was real. The papers were clear. The house, the accounts, the investments. Everything had been transferred to Helena 6 months before he died, while I was taking care of him, bathing him, holding his hand through chemo. He was finalizing a betrayal that would outlive him. I felt sick, but I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to. Instead, I went home and started packing. Not because I planned to leave, but because I needed control. I needed to touch my things and decide what stayed and what went. I packed his clothes first. Every shirt, every tie, every sock. I stuffed them into bags and drove them to a donation center. I didn't keep a single piece. I wanted the ghost of him out of my drawers, out of my closet, out of my space. Then I called a lawyer of my own. A woman this time. Sharp eyes, sharp a mind. She listened to my story without blinking. And when I finished, she said, "You might have a case." It was the first time I felt hope since the funeral. A thin, flickering flame. She explained that depending on when the assets were transferred, and under what circumstances we could challenge it, especially if I had been kept in the dark intentionally. We began gathering everything. Bank records, medical bills, emails. I gave her access to the safe, to the files, to everything I could find. She moved fast, efficient, unapologetic. She reminded me of myself decades ago, when I was running our business side by side with my husband, before I gave it all up to raise our children, before I became just the wife. It felt good to fight, to do something, to stop waiting. Word got around, as it always does. The phone started ringing again. Family, friends, people I hadn't heard from in years. Some offered support. Most wanted gossip. Did you really not know? Are you going to sue her? Do you think he loved her more? I ignored them all, except Daniel, my son. He called one night, his voice low, broken. "Mom, I knew about her," he said. "But I didn't know about the will," I swear. I sat in silence for a long time, letting his words sink in. He had known. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to change the way I looked at him. I wanted to scream at him, but I didn't. I was too tired, too numb. I just said thank you for telling me, and hung up. Then I sat at the kitchen table staring at the place where Juom used to sit every morning, sipping his coffee, pretending to be the man I thought I married. The memories kept crashing over me like waves. Our first trip abroad, the day we brought Daniel home from the hospital, the time he surprised me with dinner after I got promoted. I had treasured those moments, held onto them like pearls. Now they felt like stones in my pocket, dragging me down. How many of them were real? How many were just a cover? Helena didn't try to reach out, and I didn't contact her again. But I kept the photo, the one with her and him. I put it in a drawer, hidden, but close. I didn't know why. Maybe I needed proof. Or maybe I just wasn't ready to let go of the idea that there was more to this story than betrayal. That maybe, just maybe, there was a reason. Not an excuse, but a reason. One morning, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a short note written in careful cursive. He always said you were the love of his life. I never tried to take your place. It was signed H. I read it 5 times, then burned it in the sink. I didn't want her pity. I didn't want her guilt. I wanted answers. I wanted justice. And most of all, I wanted to feel like I mattered again. The case moved forward slowly but surely. My lawyer was confident. We had found discrepancies, paper trails that didn't add up, signatures that looked rushed, and then a breakthrough. A letter, hidden in a safety deposit box I didn't know existed, addressed to me, from him, my husband, the last thing he ever wrote. And what was inside would change everything I thought I knew. I opened it with trembling hands, afraid of what it might say. Was it another lie? Another excuse? Or was it finally the truth? I unfolded the paper, read the first line, and my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't what I expected, not at all. And it changed the way I saw everything that had happened. Every silence, every secret, every choice he had made. He had tried to protect me. That's what he wrote. He thought keeping her a secret was the only way to keep our family together. He said he knew it was wrong, but by the time he realized how much damage he'd done, it was too late. And so he gave her everything, because he had given me everything else. His love, his life, his loyalty in his own broken way. I didn't know whether to feel comforted or betrayed all over again. But I did know one thing. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. I had come too far to walk away. Too much had been taken from me. And now, for the first time in my life, I was standing up. Not as his wife, not as a mother, but as myself. As Amelia, a woman who had been wronged. And a woman who wasn't afraid to fight back. Because behind every betrayal there is a truth. And behind every truth there is a choice. And I was finally ready to make mine. I stood outside the gates of the house I had lived in for over 30 years, clutching a letter from Helena's attorney that now told me I had 30 days to vacate the property. My name wasn't on the deed anymore. My name wasn't on anything. This place, my garden, my kitchen, my bedroom, now legally belonged to her. I should have felt helpless, but instead I felt a fire building inside me. No one was going to take my life away without a fight. Inside, I walked through each room like I was saying goodbye. Not just to the walls and floors, but to the memories they held. The first time, Juon painted the living room and accidentally dyed his eyebrows white. The nights we danced in the kitchen to old records. The Christmases filled with laughter. The birthdays. The quiet mornings. And now, all of it had been signed away, as if I was just a guest passing through. I met with my lawyer the next day, handing her the eviction letter. She didn't flinch. "They're pushing," she said, tapping her pen against the paper. "That means we're getting close." The forensic accountant she hired had uncovered something big. The transfer of assets had happened while Juon was on heavy medication, barely lucid. There was proof. Medical records, timestamps, witness statements. It was enough to cast doubt on the legality of the will. But doubt wasn't enough for me. I wanted truth. I wanted accountability. I needed to know if Helena had manipulated him, if she had taken advantage of his condition, or if he had truly acted of his own free will. I wanted to believe he wouldn't do this to me, not unless he felt he had no choice. The letter I found in the safety deposit box had cracked open the possibility of regret. Now I needed to see if it was real. I decided to confront her again. I needed to look her in the eye and ask the questions that had haunted me since the funeral. She agreed to meet me, reluctantly, at a small cafe near her home. She arrived late, dressed simply, with tired eyes that mirrored my own. I didn't waste time. "Did you pressure him into changing the will?" Her face tightened. "No, he came to me. I didn't ask for any of it." I watched her closely. She didn't look like someone who had won anything. She looked like someone carrying a burden. "Why didn't he tell me?" I asked. "Because he was afraid you'd hate him," she said. "He was afraid he'd lose you." The words hit hard. I had always known Juon to be proud, stubborn, a man who avoided conflict even when it mattered most. But this went beyond fear. This was betrayal dressed in cowardice. She pushed a folder toward me. "These are copies of the letters he wrote me, from the last 5 years. I hesitated, then opened it. His handwriting, his voice. Each letter was an apology, a reflection, a confession. He called me the love of his life in every single one. But he also called her his blood, his mistake, his responsibility. He had lived torn between us, and in the end he tried to give both of us something. And failed us both. I left that cafe more confused than ever. The anger hadn't disappeared, but it was no longer alone. Grief, understanding, betrayal, compassion. They all tangled inside me like roots growing in different directions. I didn't know what to do with any of it. I drove to the beach, our beach, the one we used to visit every summer. I sat there for hours, watching the tide come in, pulling pieces of the past out of me. When I returned home, I found my front gate padlocked, a notice taped to the entrance. Helena hadn't wasted time. She had moved forward with the eviction. My blood boiled. This was war now. I called my lawyer, who promised an emergency injunction. She filed it that night. The next morning, a judge ruled in our favor. Temporary hold on the eviction, pending further review. I was back in, for now. But I knew the clock was ticking. Daniel came over that afternoon. He looked older than I remembered. Tired. "Guilty." "She's my sister." he said quietly. "I didn't know until a few years ago. He made me promise not to tell you." I stared at him, trying to feel something other than betrayal. "Did you meet her?" He nodded. "Once. She was kind. She didn't ask for any of this." I swallowed hard, but she accepted it. My children were caught in the crossfire of a war they never chose. And yet, part of me couldn't help but feel abandoned by them too. I had given my life to this family, sacrificed dreams, endured storms, kept us all afloat. And now, I was the one being erased. It was a pain deeper than I expected. Not just losing João, but losing the meaning of all we had built together. I spent the next few days gathering every piece of evidence I could find. Photos, letters, emails, bank statements. My lawyer assembled it all into a thick file. "This is more than enough to challenge the will," she said. "We'll request a full investigation. If we can prove undue influence or mental incapacity, it's void." I nodded, but I knew even if I won, the cost was already too high. Still, I had to try. Not just for the house, not just for the money, but for my name, for my place in the story of the man I loved and the life I had built. I wasn't going to be written out without a fight. I wasn't going to be a footnote in my own life. I wanted the truth, even if it hurt. Especially if it hurt, because only then could I begin to heal. One night, I found myself back in our bedroom, staring at his side of the bed. The indent was still there. I lay down, closed my eyes, and whispered into the dark, "Why didn't you trust me?" The silence answered back, heavy, final. And yet, somewhere in the quiet, I felt a shift, a strength rising from deep inside. I had survived worse, and I would survive this too. The court date was set. 3 weeks. Until then, I stayed in the house, reclaiming every inch. I cooked meals, played old records, invited my grandchildren over. I wanted them to know this place as home, not as a battleground. I wanted to fill the walls with life again, with warmth, with laughter, even if just for a little while. Because even if I didn't win the case, I needed to know I had stood my ground, that I had fought for the life I lived, for the love I gave, for the woman I had always been. I wasn't just João's widow. I wasn't just Helena's rival. I was Amelia, and this was my story, my house, my name, and I wasn't letting go. The night before our first court hearing, I couldn't sleep. My mind refused to quiet. I kept replaying every moment of the past few months. Every discovery, every letter, every lie. I got out of bed and began walking through the house with only the hallway light on, letting my fingers brush the walls like they could tell me something I didn't know. I ended up in the basement, a place João rarely allowed anyone to touch. It was cluttered, dark and colder than the rest of the house. Something about it always made me uneasy. But that night, I didn't turn back. I turned on the old yellow bulb that flickered overhead and looked around. Shelves of tools, boxes of wires, and stacks of books covered in dust. In the far corner was an old wardrobe too heavy to move. I reached behind it and ran my fingers along the wall. To my surprise, I felt a small seam. My heart began to race. I pushed, and a thin panel shifted slightly, revealing a narrow opening just wide enough to crawl through. Inside was a hidden room. Tiny, maybe no bigger than a closet, but full of secrets. On a small table sat a locked metal box, and beside it, a stack of notebooks. I took them upstairs, my hands shaking. For hours, I read every page João had written. They weren't love letters. They were records, journals, confessions about Helena, about her mother, about decisions made in shame and silence. I wasn't ready for what I found. He had met Helena's mother long before we were married. They had been childhood sweethearts, separated by distance and family pressure. When they reconnected years later, after we were already married, he had a brief affair, a mistake he never told me about. Helena was born shortly after. Her mother never demanded anything. She raised Helena alone. João sent money, sometimes visited in secret. But he never told her about me, never told me about her. One entry stood out. It was dated 6 months before his death. Amelia deserves everything, but how can I die with this weight on my chest? Helena has lived her whole life in my shadow, without my name. I owe her that at least, but God forgive me. I don't know how to tell the truth without breaking the woman I love. I read those words again and again, until they blurred on the page. I felt sick, and yet I understood. Not accepted, but understood. He was torn. He had made 1,000 wrong choices for what he thought were the right reasons. But secrets don't protect people. They destroy them, and his secrets had nearly destroyed me. Still, I kept reading, because part of me needed to know the full story, even if it broke me. There were photos, too. Helena at different ages. Birthdays, school events, graduation, all taken from a distance. He had watched her life from afar. He was always there, but never present, always hiding. I wondered how that felt for her, knowing your father existed but never truly belonging to him. And I wondered how it felt for him, carrying the weight of 2 families, never letting them meet. I kept the notebook safe. They were going to court with me, not to win the case, but to tell the truth, to show the man behind the will, the man I loved, the man who failed me, the man who tried to make it right in the wrong way. The next morning, I handed the key evidence to my lawyer. She read a few pages and looked up at me, eyes wide. "This changes everything," she said. Court was quiet that first day, sterile, cold. Helena sat across from me, her lawyer beside her. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't blame her. This wasn't just about money or property anymore. This was about legacy, about pain passed down through generations, about 2 women who were never supposed to collide, now fighting over the life one man left behind. My lawyer presented the journals, piece by piece. She explained the mental and emotional state João was in when he revised the will, how he had acted without full clarity, how the decision had come from guilt, not clarity or fairness. Helena's lawyer objected, of course, but the judge listened. Carefully, he requested a private review of the documents and adjourned for the day. As we left the courtroom, Helena approached me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't know he kept those journals." I nodded. Neither did I. For the first time, I saw tears in her eyes. Not manipulation, real pain. "I didn't want to take your home," she said. "I just wanted to know he saw me." I swallowed hard. He did, just not the way you deserved. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat on my porch, under the stars, feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. Not because it was over, but because the truth was finally out. João had hidden so much from both of us, but in the end, his own words had set it free. And now, whatever happened next, I would face it with my eyes open. The next hearing was in 3 days. Until then, I focused on what I could control. I cooked for myself. I walked in the garden. I sorted old photos, throwing out what didn't serve me, and keeping what still felt true. It was a strange kind of healing. Slow, uneven, but real. I didn't know if I would win, but I knew who I was. And for the first time in months, that was enough. My daughter Sophia visited the day before court. She brought me tea and held my hand in silence. "I never knew he had another child," she said softly. "But I'm proud of you, for standing up, for not giving up." I smiled. I needed those words more than she knew. I had spent so long being the silent one, the supportive one. But now I was something else. I was the voice in the room that wouldn't be ignored. As I prepared for the final hearing, I looked around my house, the home I had poured my soul into, and whispered a promise to myself. No matter what the judge decided, this would not be the end of me. This would be my beginning. The life I had built might have cracks, but it was still mine. And now, I was ready to fight for it without fear. The courthouse felt colder that morning. Maybe it was the rain, maybe it was the tension thick in the air, but something about that day felt different. I arrived early, dressed in the same dark suit I wore at João's funeral. It wasn't just clothing, it was armor. As I walked through the security checkpoint, I could feel eyes on me, people whispering. I was no longer just the grieving widow. I was the woman fighting back. Inside the courtroom, Helena sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, face unreadable. She wasn't the villain I had once imagined, but she wasn't innocent either. We were both victims of the same man's silence. I had come to accept that. But acceptance didn't erase what had been done. And today, I needed the court to see what I had lived through, what had been stolen from me. My lawyer began with the journals. She read excerpts aloud, carefully chosen passages that revealed Jerome's mental state, his guilt, and his confusion. The judge, an older man with sharp eyes and a steady voice, leaned forward, visibly engaged. For the first time, I felt like someone was truly listening, not just to the facts, but to the human heart behind them. We submitted the medical records next. They showed Jerome's decline, his cognitive impairment, his heavy medication, his hospital visits. A doctor testified via video, confirming that by the time he signed the revised will, Jerome would have had impaired judgment. Helena's lawyer objected, of course, arguing that Jerome had consulted with a legal advisor when changing his will. But even that advisor admitted Jerome was frail and emotionally distressed. Then came the photographs. Those hidden pictures of Helena as a child, the ones Jerome had kept in secret. My lawyer showed them to the judge, pairing them with entries from the journals. They painted a full picture, not of malice, but of a man lost in the consequences of his choices. The courtroom was silent. Even Helena's eyes glistened. When I took the stand, my hands trembled, but my voice didn't. I spoke about the life I had built with Jerome, the sacrifices, the partnership, the love. I told the court how I nursed him in his final days, unaware that he had already erased me from the life we shared. I held up the letter I found in the safety deposit box. He wanted to protect me, I said, but lies don't protect. They destroy. The judge nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Helena took the stand next. She spoke quietly, carefully, almost too calmly. I never wanted her pain, she said. I never asked for anything. I didn't even know he changed the will until after his death. She paused. I spent my life in the shadows. This, what he left me, it was the only recognition I ever got. Her voice cracked, just slightly. By the end of the day, the judge requested time to review everything before issuing a ruling. The courtroom emptied slowly. As I walked past Helena, we locked eyes. There was no hatred there, no bitterness, only exhaustion. We had both been dragged through the storm of one man's secrets. We had both lost something we couldn't replace. Outside, Sophia was waiting. She hugged me tightly. You were amazing, she whispered. I didn't feel amazing. I felt hollow. But I was proud that I hadn't let silence win, that I had fought with dignity, that I had chosen truth over bitterness. For the first time, I felt like I had reclaimed something. Not the house, not the money, but my story. Back home, the house felt different, lighter. I lit a candle in the kitchen and made myself dinner. Something simple, warm. I sat alone at the table, but I didn't feel lonely. I felt present, alive. I didn't know what the judge would decide, but I knew that, whatever the outcome, I had faced the darkest parts of my past and stood my ground. That night, I dreamt of Jerome, not the man from the end, weak and secretive, but the man from the beginning, laughing, holding my hand, whispering promises he would never fully keep. I woke up with tears on my cheeks, but I didn't feel broken. I felt free. I had loved him, truly, and now I was letting him go. The next morning, I received a call from my lawyer. The judge has scheduled the final ruling for tomorrow, she said. My heart skipped. It was coming. The answer, the closure. I stood in the middle of the living room, taking in every detail. The photos on the wall, the smell of lavender from the diffuser, the soft creak of the wooden floor. This was my life, my space, my truth. I spent the rest of the day organizing papers, going through drawers, collecting memories and setting them aside, not to throw away, but to finally see them for what they were. Pieces of a story that had been incomplete for too long. Now I was the one writing the final chapter. Before bed, I stood in the garden. The stars above me shimmered like tiny promises. I closed my eyes and whispered to the wind, whatever happens tomorrow, I'm ready. And I meant it. Because no ruling could take away the strength I had found, the clarity I had gained, or the voice I had finally learned to use. The past had broken me, but I had pieced myself back together, and in doing so, I had become someone stronger than I ever imagined. Tomorrow the court would speak, but tonight I rested in the truth, my truth, and for the first time in a long time I slept without fear. The morning of the verdict, I woke before sunrise. The house was quiet, still like it was holding its breath alongside me. I dressed slowly, choosing a navy coat João had once complimented. Not for him, but for me. I looked at myself in the mirror, seeing not the woman broken by betrayal, but someone rebuilt by fire. I took one last look around the room, unsure if I would still be living there by the end of the day. At the courthouse, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Helena was already there, sitting with her lawyer, her hands clasped tightly. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Everything between us had already been said, whether with words or with silence. The judge entered and the room fell still. My heart thudded so loudly in my chest, I was certain everyone could hear it. He began slowly, summarizing the facts. The original will, the revised will, the timing of the asset transfers, the medical records, the journals, and the letters. His voice was calm, methodical, but my body was tense with every sentence. I clutched the edge of the bench as he read through the legal standards. Mental capacity, undue influence, coercion. Then he paused, looked up at both of us and took a deep breath. In light of the evidence presented, he said, "It is the judgment of this court that the revised will was executed under conditions of compromised capacity. Therefore it is void." My breath caught. He continued, "The estate will be administered according to the original will on record, naming Mrs. Amelia Ferreira as the primary beneficiary." Gasps echoed around the courtroom. I sat frozen, unable to move, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. I had won. Legally, the house, the assets, the life I had built, they were mine again. But strangely, I didn't feel victorious. I felt something else, a strange, overwhelming wave of relief and grief, all tangled together. Helena's lawyer stood to object, asking for an appeal. The judge allowed it, but the tone in his voice made it clear it would be difficult to overturn. I turned to Helena. Her eyes were glassy, her face pale. For a moment, I saw not a rival, but a daughter left out in the cold again. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. Not anymore. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited, hungry for drama. I walked past them without a word, my lawyer shielding me from the cameras. I didn't want to become a headline. I just wanted to go home. When I finally arrived, the gate creaked open beneath my hand like it recognized me. I stood in the driveway, staring at the house I had fought so hard for. It felt different now. Less like a fortress, more like a chapter. I walked inside and sat in João's old chair. For the first time in months, it didn't feel like it belonged to a stranger. I looked around, letting the quiet settle. I had done what I needed to do. I had protected what was mine. But the scars remained. You don't go through a storm like that without being changed. The next morning, Helena showed up at my door, alone. She looked tired, older somehow. I opened the door but didn't speak. She held out a small envelope. "These were the last letters he wrote," she said. "They were meant for you. I didn't want to give them until now." I took them without a word. She didn't stay. She just turned and walked away. I sat at the table and opened the envelope. 3 letters, each written in João's shaky hand. Each one filled with sorrow, regret, and love. He admitted his failures. He begged for forgiveness. He called me his home, his compass, his peace. I cried. Not because it made things better, but because it made them real. He had loved me, deeply, but he had also failed me, profoundly, and I had every right to hate him for it. But in that moment, I didn't. I just felt the weight of all we had shared, the good and the bad. I folded the letters and placed them in the drawer beside our wedding photo. Not to forget, but to remember, truthfully. Sophia came over that night. We cooked dinner together, laughing softly, clinking glasses in quiet celebration. She told me she admired me, that she hoped to grow into a woman as strong as me. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. I had been afraid, broken, betrayed, but I had stood tall through it all. A few days later, I called Helena, asked her to meet me again. We sat on a park bench under a large oak tree, the wind carrying the first hints of autumn. "I can't change what he did," I said, "but I don't want to be your enemy." Her eyes welled up. She nodded. "Neither do I." We talked, really talked, about him, about what we'd lost, about what we might be able to rebuild. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Back at home, I walked into the garden, where Jerome had once planted roses for our anniversary. Some had wilted, others still bloomed defiantly. I knelt beside them, brushing the petals with my fingertips. Life doesn't give us clean stories. It gives us messy ones, full of contradictions, heartache, and unexpected turns. I had lost my husband, but I had found myself. And in the ruins he left behind, I had built something stronger than I ever thought possible. And tomorrow, for the first time in months, I would wake up not as the woman he left behind, but as the woman who kept going. I woke to birdsong, a sound I hadn't truly heard in months. It used to be the kind of noise that faded into the background of a busy life. But now, it felt sacred, like a soft hymn to the peace I had finally earned. The house was quiet, sunlight spilling through the curtains. I got up, made tea, and walked barefoot into the garden. The roses Jerome planted had begun to bloom again. Stubborn little things. They reminded me of myself. On the kitchen table sat the last unopened letter from Jerome. I had read the others, wept through them, processed every line. But this one I had saved. It was addressed simply, "When you're ready." And I had not been ready, until now. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. The paper was worn, as if it too had waited a long time to be touched. He started by saying he never imagined I'd read this without him sitting beside me. He wrote about our early years, our laughter, our struggles, our small victories that only we celebrated. Then he admitted everything, every lie, every silence. Every time he chose to bury the truth because he was too afraid to lose me. But in protecting myself, he wrote, I destroyed the one person who gave me everything. He asked for forgiveness, not because he deserved it, but because he hoped I might find peace. He told me he had watched me from his sickbed every day, marveling at my strength. You always carried the weight of this family, he wrote, even when I pretended I was the one leading it. His words broke something inside me, and healed something too. He ended the letter with one final truth. A bank account he had kept separate, untouched, left entirely in my name. It's not just about money, he wrote. It's about choice. I wanted you to have one, after me. Without guilt, without permission. I laughed softly through tears. He had still been trying to fix things in his own broken way. I sat with the letter for a long time, holding it to my chest. Not for him, but for myself. It was a piece of closure I hadn't known I needed. I wasn't forgiving him in that moment, but I was accepting the truth. And in that truth, I found a freedom I hadn't known since before the funeral. Weeks passed. I hired a contractor to fix the cracks in the house. Literal ones. In the walls, the roof, the floors. But as the repairs went on, I realized I was also rebuilding something deeper. Myself. I started writing again. Stories. Letters I never sent. Thoughts that once had no room to breathe. It felt like coming back to life. Helena and I continued to meet. Slowly. Carefully. We didn't talk about the will anymore. We talked about him. About the man we both knew in different ways. We laughed sometimes. Even cried once, under the same oak tree where we first sat. Healing wasn't quick. It wasn't clean. But it was happening. Sophia helped me digitize Jerome's journals. Not to publish them, but to preserve them. Not for the world. For the family. For the future. One day, when my grandchildren are older, I want them to know that truth isn't a straight line. That people can be good and still do harm. That love can exist even where pain lives. And that strength sometimes looks like staying, and sometimes like walking away. On the 1-year anniversary of Jerome's death, I didn't cry. I lit a candle, made his favorite soup, and played our old records. I danced alone in the kitchen, not in grief, in gratitude. For the life we had, for the lessons I learned, for the woman I became when everything fell apart. I received a letter that same day. From the court. Helena had officially withdrawn her appeal. No further legal action. Just a quiet end to a storm that had raged far too long. I stared at the letter, then folded it carefully and placed it with the others. Not out of sentiment, out of respect. For the journey we both survived. I sold the house 3 months later. Not because I had to, but because I was ready. I bought a smaller place by the coast, A little cottage with big windows and the sound of waves just beyond the back porch. A place for fresh starts. A place I chose. For myself. With no ghosts, no secrets, and no names on the deed but mine. Now, I sit by the window every morning with my tea, watching the horizon. I don't wait for anyone anymore. I don't live in the past. I honor it. I remember it. But I no longer let it define me. My name is Amelia. I was a wife, a mother, a caregiver, a survivor. I lost everything and found myself. And this is my story. Thank you for walking this emotional journey with me. If my story moved you, made you reflect, or reminded you of your own strength, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know you made it to the end. I read every single one. Your support means everything. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story like this. Until next time, take care of your heart and your truth.